everybody, and welcome to today's video. We're going to talk about fan service today. I actually haven't talked much about this topic in quite some time, so I guess it was inevitable that I would again at some point, but we are going to have a serious art discussion about the subject this time around, so it's kind of a double whammy of perfect for this channel. Since Sony's most recent state of play a couple of weeks ago now, there has been a bit of muttering about that has been focused on one particular game that was showed at the show. It's called Project Eve, and it's a small action title that is in development by a Korean team. It has proven to be controversial because, without beating about the bush here, it does feature a well-endowed woman wearing a bodysuit that accentuates her backside region. It's pretty standard fanservice-y stuff, in other words. Now, the game itself looks quite good, and it's certainly the title that I found to be the most appealing from what was shown at that show. But the discourse that has continued around it in the weeks since has been quite vocal and quite negative, because in the eyes of many, the sexualization is a problem. Now, I'm not going to discuss that particular topic here in this video. That discussion has already been done to death. I'm tired of it. And I find it to be a pointless discussion point anyway, because it is a purely subjective thing. If you find sexualization to be uncomfortable, then nobody is going to talk you around on that. And neither should anybody really try, since aesthetics are entirely personal and what a person likes is what a person likes. What I do want to talk about instead, though, is one particular angle that I have seen pop up and cause a fair bit of discussion in the last few days, both in relationship to this game and the general topic. There is a good tweet about it, which I'm going to read out, but not linked to because the person that said it is rather irrelevant. It is a common enough perspective that we see every time this discussion pops up. So, as the tweet goes, it's not the character that's the problem. It is the attitude by game designers and developers that are the problem. Realize that making over-sexual character designs can impact sales by alienating a large portion of gamers. It's the end part of that tweet that I have a particular objection to, and that's the point of this video. For one thing, I'm not sure it's true at all. Certainly, there are some people that would lose interest in a game that they found to be sexualized if they previously had interest in it before finding out about the sexualization. But there is a big, huge market out there for sex stuff. Look at what happened to OnlyFans and Tumblr when they pulled back on the sex content, in the case of OnlyFans for a while, but look at what happened to them. Sex sells is a truism that is only curbed by the disproportionate weight that censorship organizations and advertising agency regulators put on a small number of complaints. To make that simple, in other words, every second ad would have bikinis and men in thongs in them if it didn't mean that a dozen people would file complaints with the regulator and the advertising agency would risk all of that money being spent in the production of an ad being taken down, all because of 12 complaints. So no, I don't believe that sexualization costs more than a vocal minority of consumers. But more to the point, and the real crux of the video here, is the idea that game developers are somehow obligated to appeal to a large portion of gamers, as the tweet states, or even a niche. Mainstream or not, whether the creative decisions bankrupt the developer or make them billionaires, no artist is ever obligated to make art to the satisfaction of any single demographic of consumer. Now, this attitude happens because people ultimately do not believe that video games are artworks. I know I say that over and over and over again on this channel, but I say it because art to the games industry is a process of legitimacy rather than any true intent. It's a way of saying that games are just as valid as film and literature, but the moment that it comes time to treat games like an artwork, people take a huge step back and they reverse their position on that entirely. They say they care about games as art, but when it comes down to it, every single time that it comes to talking about games as art and not as products, the vast majority of this industry reverts to treating the game like a product. When it comes to products, you do have certain rights to expect satisfaction from what you've purchased. And the goal of any product manufacturer is to sell as many units as they can, regardless of who they sell it to. It doesn't really matter who buys a product as long as they buy it. Products don't say anything. They don't mean anything. They exist to be consumed and then discarded once their utility is no longer of value to the consumer. Art is fundamentally different to this. Art says something. Art means something. Art is not there to be discarded. Rather, art is a statement of record that represents the culture, the attitudes, and the people of the time. Because of that, suddenly the audience that you're reaching out to does matter, because it's impossible to make an artwork that everybody out there will love. Artists will specifically aim to target the people who do suit their target audience, without concerning themselves with those who are not their target. That's a pretty simple statement, but basically, a person that makes a horror film or writes a horror book to appeal to people who like horror is not going to be concerned with upsetting people who don't like being scared. Of course they're not. That is, they're not writing a horror book for people who don't like horror. They know that the person who doesn't like art is not going to witness their art, and they're comfortable with that. Typically, a horror or filmmaker or whatever doesn't care if somebody doesn't like horror. They just don't go and watch the horror work that they've made, and that's okay. The same goes for fan service. People who don't enjoy sexy, fleshy characters aren't going to go and play a game that has those characters, but that doesn't mean that an artist necessarily needs to go and target that audience. In fact, it's quite the obvious. This is all quite obvious, you know. An artist shouldn't have to go and target a demographic that isn't interested in their work. And as obvious as that sounds, the unfortunate reality is that in this industry, there are a lot of people that genuinely believe that if a game doesn't appeal to them personally, then it is somehow a negative reflection on the artist that made it. The artist is obligated to appeal to them. If they're not, then the artist has made bad art. And look, I know that the AAA blockbuster industry is really the one at fault here. Those developers and publishers go out there so desperate to make their games universally beloved so they can sell a lot of copies that they hide from the most simple questions about whether their game has anything to say at all. You know, games can't be political in the AAA space. But that's not normal to art, and that is really actually a problem for art. If you're not willing to alienate part of the overall gaming community to say something, then you're doing as much harm to games as a concept, as an art form, as the most cynical examples of capitalism like microtransactions and live services. It is a profoundly anti-art position to make. So in conclusion here, the developers of Project Eve are not required to make their game less sexy for people that don't enjoy that in games. If the sexualization means that you don't end up buying that game, then that is absolutely, totally fine. But to act like the developer is doing something wrong in the process is some real entitlement in action. If a game ultimately fails because there isn't a big enough audience or demographic for the sexualization and sex themes, then that is also fine. It's okay for games to fail. To argue that game developers shouldn't make these games at all because you personally don't want to play them is not. None of this is to suggest that Project Eve or any other game out there is above criticism, and I will forever defend the right and need for critics to be critical of games. That is really important to the artistic process as well. However, let's not argue that artists should only focus on making art that will appeal to particular demographics and sell a lot of copies. That very idea is precisely the opposite of what we should be asking for from our games as artworks. So thanks as always for tuning into this video. Do let me know your own thoughts in the comments. I'm sure we can have some good, robust discussion about this. Should game developers moderate what they're doing if that will help them appeal to a broader audience? If they happen to be, a niche developer, is that fine? If not, just how homogenized should games be in order to appeal for the broad audience? Anyway, do let me know your thoughts in the comments. It'll be great to have a chat. Other than that, if you did enjoy this video and you enjoy the work that we're doing, don't forget to mash that like and subscribe button. That way you won't miss any as we upload them. And also, you can support us on Patreon if you'd like to. Totally optional, of course, but if you want to support us for $1 a month or more, then you will help us to grow what we're doing on this channel, as well as digitallydownloaded.net. And also, you'll get a 48-page monthly magazine, which goes in depth into Japanese art and culture and stuff. Not just video games, but we talk about a whole lot. We talk about history, we talk about film, literature, music, food, drinks, the whole lot. You know, the magazine's really there as a general interest thing for people who are interested in Japanese games and want to understand a little bit more about the country as well that produces them. All right, thanks very much as always for tuning in. We will see you next time.